Thank you for listening to this Podcast One production, now available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, PodcastOne.com, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
Hello and welcome. You're tuned into the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Along with me, Tim Dennis. And Tim?
Yes.
We've got a treat in store today.
I'm excited.
Can you believe August 11th, 2011? Not that I'm, keeping that close a track, Tim, but that was the last time we visited with this guest. Mm-hmm. And then shortly afterwards, I had a chance to connect with him at Dragon Con in Atlanta and followed up on that conversation. He's back. He's got a TV program on Travel Channel called True Terror with Robert Englund. And this is a really cool show, folks. If you have not had a chance to see it yet, tune in, check it out. Wednesday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central. Hidden away in the dark shadows of our nation's history are tales so terrifying that they must be true. Well, now veteran actor and legendary horror movie icon Robert Englund, Freddy Krueger, of course, from a Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, scours news reports of yesteryear to bring viewers twisted tales ripped straight from the headlines in True Terror with Robert Englund. In each episode, Mr. Englund actually uses his ominous tones and creepy charisma to masterfully weave together a trilogy of spine-tingling tales guided by newspaper accounts and layered with commentary from historians and experts that prove that the truth is always a little stranger than fiction. From flying monsters to creatures in the night to evil possessions and hauntings, these twisted tales will leave the viewers wishing the stories really were only in their dreams. It's a 6-part series. True Terror with Robert Englund began on Wednesday, March 18th. Keep an eye out for it. As a matter of fact, pause the show if you need to, folks. Go set your DVRs, watch it immediately, set it up. And remember, too, when you're going to watch these shows, folks, don't just power through them, record all of them, and then go watch them all 6-8 weeks from now. Watch them within 2 to 3 days of the day they air so that the ratings count and you can continue to see fine programming like this brought to the TV screen. Mr. Englund, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
The series is awesome. We got a chance to watch the entire run, my co-host and I, and each episode just gets better and better. What about this program and project brought you back and made you realize this is something you wanted to do?
Well, I mean, there's a challenge to it that I hadn't really addressed before. I've hosted award shows, and I've narrated movies, but I've never done both at the same time. So there's that blend from being the on-camera persona that I am as host of the show, as well as having to make those choices when I'm narrating about when to be theatrical and when to be conversational and when just to spit the facts out, kind of normal. And we sort of adopted, I bring a lot of baggage from my work in horror movies and fantasy and sci-fi. So I bring a certain amount of baggage to my own on-screen persona. And so we dusted it with a little bit of, a little Rod Serling and a little bit of Vincent Price. But then when I'm doing we have to do that blend from me being on camera to the reenactments. And I don't always know what they've shot. My crew's been off south of Richmond, Virginia, in these old covered bridges and old barns and these great locations shooting. And I don't always know how macabre or dark or violent a sequence might be. I know what's on the script page, but I haven't seen it yet. You were saying a few minutes ago that you've seen all 6 episodes, which is 18 segments. You've seen more than I have, because when I was assembling the project, I would just see bits and pieces. So I'm also doing my sort of comfort food TV every Wednesday night, and I turn my sound bar up loud with my flat screen, and I settle on my couch wrapped in a blanket with my dog in my lap, because it's fun for me to watch these too, because I haven't seen them all yet. I've only seen bits and pieces. But the challenge for me was blending from the on-screen persona to the narration. And I used a little bit, I borrowed some ideas from that wonderful fellow that hosts Dateline and narrates Dateline. And I also brought in a little bit of some of the writing in the wrap-ups. It has a little bit of a Rod Serling Twilight Zone quality to it. And you find those rhythms, and you want to accentuate that. So that was also something that influenced us. Also, I think the whole show, and some of your viewers may be too young, some of your listeners may be too young to remember, but there was a great old show on a kind of great comfort food television called Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack. And we also took a nod from that. One of our producers was very taken with that show as a young man, as a teenager. And so we wanted to offer that kind of retro appeal also with our show.
Was it surprising to you just how many strange and unusual headlines were actually out there?
Well, I starred a film called Urban Legend back in the late 90s, early 2000s with Jared Leto, and wonderful cast. Good movie, good little movie.
It definitely is.
So I sort of, dipped my foot in the world of urban legends then. And over the years doing horror movies, you also, on location, the locals always want to tell you, their local urban legends. But what I love about True Terror is all of our stuff, at least at one point in history, was sourced in newspaper articles. And, I'm not a great Bigfoot fan. I sort of lost my Bigfoot virginity back in the late 60s or early 70s at the drive-in movie with that Legend of Boggy Creek, which was kind of a cheesy Bigfoot movie. I think they shot that on 16 millimeter. But subsequently, I've learned through Native American lore and other sources that the Sasquatch legend actually goes back several hundred years in North America. And our particular Bigfoot Sasquatch episode, which was last week, I believe, our sort of thematic True Terror Critters episode.
Right. Yeah.
But our Bigfoot Sasquatch legend was literally sourced by a president of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt. Quotes, diary, newspaper articles about what he experienced camping in Montana. So I like that aspect to it, that we get this hindsight, this insight, if you will, into the American psyche, the American tabloid psyche, the superstitious American psyche of the 19th and early 20th century. Obviously, science has disproved some of our stories, and medical science as well. We're not as superstitious as we were. But we were more open to the sort of dark underbelly of reportage back then. And I like that. We treat it not with a wink or with a tongue in a cheek, but with the idea that everybody knows that we are looking at it with a kind of hindsight, which is why I think it's so fun to have the period reenactments.
I agree. And it makes it, it makes it really cool because you get that flavor of what it felt like or looked like back then. In the first episode, obviously, we come out swinging with nightmarish stories, and one of my largest, or I should say biggest fears, being buried alive. And
that's my favorite segment in that show, too, yeah.
Well, that's
one of the segments that's absolutely true. That is true terror. I mean, that's not refuted. During the smallpox epidemic in New Orleans, there was a lot of corruption. Medical science was growing at an incredible pace then. And people didn't have the science yet to really determine if someone was really dead. There was that fine line where people could still be alive or in comas, we address that in another segment. But there was also corruption, which is intriguing to me. It's that underbelly again of the American psyche. There were people being buried alive, and the coroner, and sometimes the coffin builders, and the guys that would drive the coffin to the graveyard, to the cemetery, and the grave diggers themselves were all getting paid to get these bodies underground. And people were literally being buried alive. There's these great blueprints that we show on that episode of coffins that were constructed with bells inside, so that if the person that was buried came to in the coffin, he could ring the bell. Obviously, it was occurring enough that they literally had a business of coffin bells, interior coffin bells. Now, there's some venture capitalism.
Right, and you get three of our most famous colloquialisms from that, right? You get dead ringers.
Dead ringers.
You get Saved by the Bell.
The David Cronenberg Saved by the Bell, which is also a boxing metaphor, Yeah,
and then you get Graveyard Shift.
Graveyard Shift, yeah.
Right? So you've got all of these kind of originating from that time era as well.
Right after I narrated that episode and I saw a lot of the images, and I wanted to check on the makeup, which was very successful, I picked up a book Guest had left at my home, The Devil in the White City.
Oh, sure.
About the exposition.
Yeah.
World Fair in Chicago in 1893, and the parallel story being the serial killer H.H. Holmes. But what was illuminating for me about that was he was able to dispose of a lot of bodies to medical colleges and medical schools because there weren't enough. They needed them. They needed skeletons. They needed them for dissection, and so you understand that probably was also going along during the smallpox episode in New Orleans, because there were people that, I don't know if corrupt's the right word. They just needed that stuff for medical science, probably just to look in the cadavers to see what damage the smallpox was doing to organs. But on the other hand, I think some of those people they cut open may not have been ready to be cut open, if you get my drift.
Oh, I do. Terrifying. And you know what's so strange about that era in time, the body stealing, is the fact that it was illegal to open the graves and take the clothing or jewelry or anything that had been buried, but the laws were a lot less stringent when it came to actually stealing the body.
Yeah, I think there was this sort of a kind of understanding or forgiveness about the body after death, then that it could be used for other things. And we were, you have to remember, at that moment of time too, medical science is growing by leaps and bounds, and the doctor was a very honored profession. Compared to like the snake oil salesman. And so that there was a lot of that stuff was just sort of approved of because it was considered virtuous to have cadavers for science. And so I think there was a lot more stuff going on that wasn't, really black and white. There was a gray area then for probably, I don't know, maybe 20 years, a score of years before they started passing any kind of laws or rules governing any of that stuff.
Well, we talk, of course, my fear being buried alive. Tim and I have joked about that on the air for 14 years now. But when it comes to things like that, what scares Robert Englund?
Well, the buried alive is global. It's international.
Right.
It's one of the primal nightmares or primal dreams that everybody, from an igloo in Alaska, to somewhere in the Middle East, somewhere in Africa, somewhere in Antarctica. It's a common dream that people have. Fear of falling, fear of drowning, being buried alive, fear of suffocation, fear of burning alive. We all share that nightmare. And it's interesting. I have a falling dream. And it was, I believe, originated with a childhood movie I saw called The 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T. And it's about a boy who hates his piano lessons. I think the great actor Hans Conried, who I think is the voice in the mirror for Snow White, the Disney animated Snow White. But Hans Conried was this great character actor in the 50s and early 60s in America and the 1940s as well. And he plays the piano teacher from hell. And there's Salvador Dali did the sets for this movie. I think Stanley Kramer either produced or directed it, the great Stanley Kramer. And there's a sequence where a boy falls through the sky, down, 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 and he's sort of spiraling onto this grand piano. And it's surrounded by this sort of surreal set by Salvador Dali. And I still have that nightmare occasionally. And it's usually when I'm catching a cold. I think the first time I had that dream, I had a fever. I had the flu or something when I was a child. And that sort of aggravated the dream and made it just more terrifying for me. But I still have that. And that I believe that's sort of a combination of the primal falling dream combined with this movie, this children's film that I saw called The 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T. I saw it one afternoon, I think waiting for the Mickey Mouse Club to begin, or after the Mickey Mouse Club ended. It came on, the matinee theater on television, and I sat there at home and watched it. And boy, it scarred me for life.
I love the fact that you guys are digging so deep into these old stories. And what really kind of stood out to me is it's like how they were so almost matter of fact about reporting these kind of stories in major metropolitan newspapers at one time. Nowadays, it's only around October, and it's usually tongue in cheek. If they do a news story on TV, it's got to be laced with the X-Files theme. But the fact that there are so many of these just bizarre, unusual tales that live and exist in our past, and were just accepted as kind of,
I think we accepted them. I think we were just more open, you guys. Back then, I think we were just more open to the strange and the dark and the superstitious. There was still a lot of stuff that hadn't been explained. Intellectually, we were less educated back then. And so we forgave a lot of things that could probably be explained away. And that's why there's this sort of stamp of approval, the fact that they made it into real newspapers all over the country. And, it's interesting. Sometimes when I'm on location, all over America or in Europe, locals love to share with me the urban legends of their town. I mean, we all know that the cliche, the hook man on Lover's Lane. It's like that line from Nightmare on Elm Street. Every town has an Elm Street, and every town has a hook man on Lover's Lane. That's an urban legend that's sort of been spread a little thin. But it is interesting because I would love to go back now and visit some of the locales that some of our stories are from and just hear the details that those small towns in Pennsylvania or in New England or down in the South, the stories they have that we didn't even get in our segments, the other aspects to it, or actually see the real location. We sometimes, out of budget necessity, we need to double a location for the actual location. I don't want to lie and say that we're always in the real location. We found some great areas adjacent to Richmond, Virginia, where you find these great old barns and covered bridges and things like that, old homes and buildings, and we can use them for our locations. And but I think it would be fun at some point to just rent a car. And I've wanted to do this with Civil War battlefields, but I would love to just rent a car sometime and see some of the locations that I've talked about on the show, and actually talk to the locals about their take on the things that have become urban legends that began as these news reports.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you're ever interested, I'm a fellow mate on Travel Channel with our TV show, The Holzer Files, and I'd be happy to take you along on one of our investigations to a historic site, because it is something when you get to actually stand in a location that has such an amazing history and story to it, and history itself, and then the strange or the supernatural layered on top of it. It's unlike anything. You know, I don't know if you're familiar with the Morris Jumel Mansion in New York, but one of the biggest, most evocative ghost stories ever told, because this group of kids and their teachers and adults were standing out front of the place in the morning waiting for it to open so they could go on this field trip. And this was in the late 60s. As they're waiting and playing around, kids are making a lot of racket. The upstairs doors open, and this woman glides out and shushes everyone and tells them to be quiet, goes back in the house. A few minutes later, the docent appears and goes to open the door, and the teachers and everybody apologize for the kids disrupting the employees inside, and the docent tells them, there's nobody here, I'm the first one. And they're like, well, no, you have that woman in the period costume who came out and shushed us. And she assured them there's nobody in this house. She opened the door, and there on the wall is the portrait of Mrs. Jumel. And everybody was stopped in their tracks, because that's exactly who they saw drift out. This wasn't just a one-off. This wasn't one person seeing it. It was an entire clutch of people that were standing there that witnessed that experience. And that is really kind of mind-blowing to know that there was history. Like George Washington used the house as a station during the war, and this ghost story associated with it, and so many other layers involved in the history of what that property was.
I've always respected the concept that, you know, we're all energy. There's a certain electrical charge to the human body that enables life. I mean, that's the source of Frankenstein. That was the science that fascinated Mary Shelley when she wrote Frankenstein at the time, in the Age of Enlightenment in the 18th century. But I've often thought that, especially with illness, an old grandmother or grandfather who is quite ill for years and years and is housebound in the same room somewhere, and it deals with pain and angst and worry and suffering, that some of that energy is preserved in that room. And in my long life, I have been in a few places and that have been the sort of repository of that kind of energy. And you do feel it. I was in a morgue with the actor Andrew Prine, working on a miniseries once, and both of us we felt an incredible presence of suffering, and I think it might have been a prison morgue. I'm not sure I'm remembering this correctly, but it was palatable. And I've been in rooms where people were ill and confined for 20 years because of illness, and the easy way to say it is it's in the air, but I think it's just, left over energy of misery that is palpable, and you can sense that. And if you want to call that a ghost or a spirit or an energy, that's your choice. But I do respect that there is this residue of prior lives and prior pain, if you will.
With that said, have you ever seen or witnessed something you think was a ghost?
I haven't, but I come from a very pragmatic, liberal, Adlai Stevenson liberal, martinis, Sinatra, and cigarettes family. And my father had to share a UFO experience with a Marine Air Corps colonel who had retired and was an executive with a very huge helicopter company and had been flying an old PBY amphibious plane as a businessman's rental jet. It wasn't a jet plane, to Catalina, back and forth from Catalina to Long Beach, for his guests to go to Catalina and visit and stay at Catalina, guests of Wrigley and other people, as in Wrigley Gum, the owner of Catalina Island for many, many years. And my father stayed up all night with this gentleman because he had experienced something flying back from Catalina that was so incredible. And my dad talked him out of reporting it because he didn't want him to lose his very lucrative military officer's pension because he just had a child. But so I had that experience. And then shortly after that, my mother, my practical Democrat mom, told me, and this would be the ghost story, I guess, if we have to give it a label. She had been in a sorority house in the foothills between Glendale, California, and I don't know whether Montrose or Monrovia, whatever the town adjacent is, like Pasadena, and there had been that great flood in the 1930s, and it's why all the rivers in Los Angeles and in Orange County have all been sort of, hollowed out and filled with concrete now. They're like big channels, and they're ugly, but because we can get an incredible amount of rain here when it does rain in a short amount of time, and that whole area had flooded terribly. Lots of death in the 1930s. And my mother, being the low man on the totem pole at the sorority, was tasked with doing the dishes. The girls had been up most of the night, smoking cigarette and eating cupcakes and smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee and gossiping and listening to news reports about this terrible flood affecting Southern California. And the rains had finally passed and the floodwaters were subsiding. And my mom was cleaning up and doing the dishes and emptying the ashtrays and wiping them out and hanging the coffee cups up on their hooks. And there was a knock at the door. And one of the sorority girls came in, and she'd been out and she was all wet and her hair was wet. And my mom took the dish towel and toweled her hair dry, and she sat down. My mom made her a fresh cup of coffee, and they shared a cigarette, and she told her how wet it was and how storming it was outside. And she'd finally made it back, and she went upstairs, and my mom, turned the lights off and went to bed. And there was a knock at the door at dawn. And my mom went back to the door and opened it up, and there were policemen there. And they wanted to know if this is where a certain young lady lived, a sorority girl, and it was the girl that my mom had seen after midnight with the wet hair and wet clothes. And my mom said, yeah, she's upstairs. And they said, oh, no, we found her body over 12 hours ago, which would have been before my mother sat down and had a cup of coffee with her. And my mother said, no, she's upstairs. And, of course, she wasn't upstairs. And my mother even showed the police the coffee cup with her lipstick on it. And that's coming from an old, Stevenson Democrat that liked to smoke her Benson and Hedges, and she had her happy hour martini every night, and didn't believe in ghost stories, and didn't have crystals, and and didn't go to yoga class, and believe in anything too strange. But that was her ghost story, which having two great stories like that from your practical, no-nonsense parents, with that kind of a source, you always want to give it a little more credibility, and it just makes you a little more open to other worlds. And again, I think with True Terror, that's part of what the hindsight of it taking place in the 19th and early 20th century does for us, is that yes, we weren't as smart and we didn't know as much, and some things can be explained away, obviously, but we also were more open to a lot of that stuff back then, which is where the source of these urban legends and these stories come from. Some of these ghost stories come from. But again, when you look at stories like the smallpox story, or one of the stories that's going to be on tonight about the guy that preserves the love of his life. Think Anthony Perkins in Psycho.
Yes.
Mother! That's one of our stories tonight. These are true stories. They're dark. They're ugly. They're as horror show as you can get. And they really happen. They really are true terror.
We are going to take our final break. We'll be back. We've got more with Robert Englund, plus some of your questions when we return to the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio.
Now on Podcast One, we present Murder in the Family.
True crime is stranger than fiction.
Hosted by Geraldo Rivera.
This talented actor, the years that follow these horrific crimes are filled with
At one point, you hear this shot being fired.
Ultimately, it was classified as an accidental shooting.
Murder in the Family. Available on Apple Podcasts, Podcast One, and wherever podcasts are available.
Welcome back to the program. Today we've got a great one for you. Robert Englund is here with us, and we have been discussing his new TV series on the Travel Channel, True Terror with Robert Englund. It's Wednesday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central. Check your local listings and times in your area. And please, this is really important, folks, for all the TV shows that you like. If you're like me, you probably you record all of them, and then on a rainy, crummy weekend, you break through and watch them all, and you think, wow, I'm really supporting the show. Although you are, because you're watching it and you love it and you probably talk about it, the way the ratings work, it has to be watched off your DVR within the first 3 days. If you can't watch it live, watch that show in the first 3 days on your DVR so that it counts and that you'll continue to see these programs come back and entertain us on TV. If you know you can't get to it in the first 3 days, turn it on while you're taking a shower so it runs in the background and counts. You know you're going to watch it anyway, then go back to it when you have a chance. But that's the way you're going to keep your favorite shows alive. That's just a little insider trading here. I hope you guys will take that to heart and remember that for all the TV programs that you like to watch. We've got some questions, but Robert, I was
just going to say as a parenthetical to that, no one knows how to measure ratings truly anymore.
Right.
This is the great tragedy that befalls a lot of great shows that fall through the cracks. I look at television in two different ways now. If you want to binge stuff that streams, but you need to support the shows that are on broadcast and cable, and by watching them when they're on. And you know what I do is I like binging. I'm sure you do too. I just binged Narcos Mexico, which was a lot of fun. But I also, binging can exhaust you. And sometimes I need what I call my comfort food viewing. And I might turn on your show. I might turn on Deadliest Catch. Who knows? Moonshiners. Dateline. Who knows? But sometimes, I like those shows. I know when I can run downstairs and make a sandwich and come back, and they'll do a previously on, or they'll do the recap, and I can catch back up. But they're not as taxing as binging. And when you're doing that, you're giving that show an honest rating and supporting it, especially if you like it. And I'm sort of delineating between the two now, because that's another way you can support shows that you like.
I agree. Thank you very much. I wanted to share something with you. As we're talking about the premise of your new show, True Terror with Robert Englund on Travel Channel, it's delving into these old headlines and parts of the newspaper. I have a headline that we uncovered a few years back, and this one just really kind of unnerved me. This comes from the New York Herald on Sunday, August 7th, 1887. There's a haunted house. Amityville possesses a haunted house. No one knows why it is so called, but it is known as such, and that settles it. It is a place of valuable property situated on the banks of a pretty lake half a mile from the beach. It was bought some years ago by a New York party who fitted it up handsomely and prepared it for occupancy in every way, but never occupied it, and has ever since let it go to ruin. Its vast garden is full of wild weeds, its portico has become rickety, its Grecian columns are tumbling down, and its general appearance is weird and forsaken. That was an article written 100 years before the events that took place in the Amityville horror story. And I thought that was really intriguing that here's an article. Thank God now we have all these different ways to access past articles. This has never been exploited in any of the movies, TV serials, or anything regarding the Amityville horror. This is an original headline.
It's the ideal ultimate prequel.
Exactly.
To the Amityville horror. You know, this is why I was saying earlier, about the sourcing of our, I'm going to call it Sasquatch because I hate the phrase Bigfoot, but our Sasquatch episode, which was last week, is sourced by the President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, in a diary, in quotes, in newspapers, and it's like light years before, that little cheesy, Legend of Boggy Creek 16 millimeter drive-in movie with a guy running around in a gorilla suit was made. This, and so there's that kind of hindsight gives it a little more credibility. The Native American lore in North America has lots of stories about Sasquatch, and many of them are hundreds of years old. They've been passed along as oral tradition. And then Teddy Roosevelt at the turn of the century, having a sighting experience in Montana. It's real. It's just fun to see how far back this stuff goes. And it gives you a whole new way of looking at it instead of it just being, a 70s grindhouse movie, that you saw at the drive-in movie on your way to second base with a girl.
Now you've got quite the resume of movies and television shows, and I remember being introduced to you actually from the TV series and miniseries V. And I remember when it was I was helping my buddy's father who owned a video store at the time, and we were unboxing things and cleaning up, and he goes, "Here, open this up. We have to put this new standee out." And I opened the standee out, and there's Freddy Krueger. And I'm like, "Oh, this thing is so creepy." And he goes, "That's Willie from V." I was like, "No, it's not." "Yeah, it is. It really." I couldn't believe it. You brought such a diverse way of acting that, even though when you look at it now, you can obviously tell that's Robert Englund doing his deal at that time and loving your character on V. I could not even fathom the fact that kind-hearted rebel alien Willie could possibly be this undeniable beast of the night. And that has always stood out for me. The first time I ever saw Nightmare on Elm Street was on a black and white TV at my friend's house because his parents were watching the good TV downstairs. So we plugged in and we're watching Nightmare, and in black and white, Alfred Hitchcock's psycho vibe to it still scared the ever-loving hell out of me. That has got to be one of the best horror and psychological thriller movies ever made. And I still thrill at it every time we do get a chance to watch it. And even introducing my kids when they became teenagers to the original Nightmare on Elm Street has always been a big thing for me. Was it interesting? I mean, how close in realm was that, being Willie and Freddy? I feel like it was right butted up against each other. Is that right?
Well, yeah, it was simultaneous, but I will give you an actor's confession now. And I think if you got a couple of beers in most actors would admit this too.
Okay.
Extremes are easier to act than middle stuff. It's easier to play a character role, an extreme character role. Now, like a hunchback that's real extreme, but it's easier to play an extreme villain or someone that's really nerdy and damaged than it is to play something closer to yourself. That's really the hardest stuff to do. The tragedy is that a lot of acting on film you don't want to get caught acting, and so you have a little voice in your head going, don't act, don't act, don't act. Well, with that voice going off in your head, you're actually doing as much censoring and as much acting as if you were walking around with a mustache on and a fake nose and a toupee. Because it is distracting. It's that other voice in your head. And that happens a lot when you're playing stuff that's close to the bone. But with Willie, which was nothing like me, he was a malaprop, and I was trying to channel my director creator Kenneth Johnson, who did all the great shows. Oh my God, Bionic Man, Bionic Woman, Bionic Dog, Bionic Cousin. Kenny was responsible for all that great stuff. But Kenny told me just to channel Gene Wilder. That was his note to me at my audition. And I loved Gene Wilder. And I loved Gene Wilder in different movies than most people think of him. Most people think of him in as Young Frankenstein or The Producers. But I loved Gene Wilder in a movie called Quacks or Fortune, has a cousin or is alive and well and living in the Bronx. I think that was the title with the girl that played Lois Lane, Margot Kidder. But I'd also known, because I had done the role on stage, I knew that Gene Wilder played Billy Bibbit in Not Sometimes a Great Notion, in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Kirk Douglas off Broadway. And that's why Michael Douglas had the rights to it and made the movie with Jack Nicholson. And because I knew the part of Billy Bibbit and knew that Gene Wilder had played that part, and I also loved him from Bonnie and Clyde as the kidnapped bank teller, I was able to channel that part of Gene Wilder. And that's how I got to Willie. And Freddy was just liberating all those days in the makeup chair, refining the makeup and discovering the makeup. I found the voice at some point that went with what I was seeing in the mirror. And that sort of opened the door for me. But it was very liberating because I'd been doing so much television right around then. When I got all that theatrical makeup on, I was able to change my voice and change the way I move. And that's very liberating for an actor. I was able to use a lot of tricks that I had from the theater. And when I got done with Freddy in 2004, 2005, Freddy versus Jason, and I've done a couple of makeup roles since then, but most of my makeup roles were in the 90s. I had aged, and I grew a beard. My beard came in, partially gray, and my hairline had receded a bit, and I had some, wrinkles and some character to my face. I didn't look like a kid anymore. I was kind of starting to look a little like Max von Sydow or Klaus Kinski, a little bit of Vincent Price. And I was able to sort of use all of the success of Freddy and the other films that I had done and how liberating it was. And I think it actually improved my acting. And but now I had this new face, this aged face, and I was able to kind of segue into other horror and science fiction and fantasy roles because I had, paid my dues, in the world of horror and science fiction and fantasy. I was now playing those older roles, the old priest, the scientist, the old professor. Yeah. And I normally wouldn't have probably gravitated to those roles or even been offered those roles. But because I had been loyal to my genres, there was sort of a natural fit after I took the makeup off. And I had more courage with those roles and with my vocal choices because I had been so liberated from working under the piles of latex for so many years.
If I could, just a few more Freddy type questions, but one of my other favorites, I loved the series. I loved the fun, the campy, the horror. I loved when Wes Craven took it back to the nightmare quality of the first movie with Wes Craven's New Nightmare and had this creation of Freddy Krueger kind of haunting the cast of the original movies. Stepping forward with that in that kind of realm, I mean, what did you take? Was that a cool version for you to come back at and be more of the silent predatory stalker and do that, or did you love all the different iterations of Freddy that you brought forth?
Wes gave Freddy a sense of humor from the get-go. I mean, Freddy, I'm your boyfriend now, and the tongue comes out of the phone, and, he's cutting his fingers off, and green goose coming out, and he's making wisecracks in part 1. We maybe jumped the shark a bit in part 6, and I think my editors over the years, some of the scenes would end with a dark choice and with one of Freddy's one-liners, and oftentimes the editors erred in the choice of the one-liner because it gave them a nice sort of rim shot, a kind of percussive punctuation point to a scene. But I loved Wes Craven's New Nightmare. It's my favorite in the series, in the franchise. It was made as a kind of Valentine to the fans. Wes had gone to a lot of film festivals. We've both been going to a lot of film festivals and genre film festivals and Comic-Cons at that time. And we were all successful. We'd seen the growth and the change in horror and in special effects. And Wes sort of did that as a Valentine to the fans. It was also fun kidding ourselves, and making fun of ourselves.
Right.
And that movie was a success. It wasn't a big hit. It was just a success. But then Scream came out, which was even more meta and more deconstructed. And that really enabled fans, after they'd seen the Scream movie, first one or the second one, they were able to go back and rent a DVD or a Blu-ray of Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and they were able then to see all of the Easter eggs in it and to see how smart that movie was, and what a sweet little Valentine to the fans it was, and also how self-deprecating it was about us.
Now, Freddy versus Jason, again, I just love the whole idea of that. I was always curious, so they start off that movie with a very detailed, terrifying view of Freddy, and then kind of revert back to the rest of the movie serial version of it. Why did they start him off more demonic and then kind of roll it into a different version? Is there any insight you have on that for us?
Well, I look at Freddy versus Jason almost as a graphic novel come to screen.
Right.
And I think that because of Sam Raimi and Evil Dead, and because of Freddy versus Jason, I think we really opened the door so there could be Deadpool and Guardians of the Galaxy, which are very necessary to combine the humor with the horror. And not be afraid of it. I think that we did that. There's an old saying that Wes used to have, which is really directorial and structural. But if you have an unrelenting horror movie and there's no humor in it, or there's not comic relief, there comes a point when the audience is so uncomfortable at being scared and identifying with a particular character, either a survival girl that's going to die or that's going to live, or a cast member that's going to die. What happens is the audience will begin to laugh at you. When you have a comic relief character, or even the Freddy Krueger character, or some element where you can tell the audience it's okay to laugh, that this is a joke, or that we are giving you a wink here, that just makes it easier for the director and the editor to set that audience up for a scare again, for a jump. And that's why I think Wes did it originally. I'm not sure. I think Sam was actually already pioneering in a new kind of horror comedy that he just thought that those two could be blended. And when you look at the success of Deadpool and what Deadpool did for superheroes, and what Guardians of the Galaxy did to science fiction, you realize how necessary that was. It's almost like that moment of time when the supergroups, the billionaire supergroups, were getting too arrogant and pompous, and we needed punk rock. We needed that. Right. We needed punk rock come in and to remind everybody what handmade rock and roll was. And I think that was part of what Freddy and Wes and Sam Raimi, and especially Freddy versus Jason and Deadpool and Guardians of the Galaxy did. They did break that wall down, and it's a necessary thing. It's somewhere we needed to go.
All right, we've got a little bit of time left together, and I know I've got some questions here from listeners. Paul Bestall wants to know if you have any fun memories or interesting movie memories of Ford Fairlane.
Oh, my God, Ford Fairlane. Andrew Dice Clay. That was Rennie Harlan directing that, who directed me in Nightmare 4. I replaced Billy Idol in that film. I think Billy Idol dropped a Harley Davidson up in the Hollywood Hills and broke his wrist, and he was supposed to play that part of this sort of English roadie who winds up living in L.A. after, which is true. I used to hang out at a pub in Laurel Canyon in the Hollywood Hills near my home, and it was all the Brits that had retired to Laurel Canyon. And when they first came to L.A. on tour, when they came to America, they fell in love with Southern California, and a lot of them stayed, and a lot of their road crew stayed. The English supergroups had great road groups, road managers, and roadies, and a lot of those guys just stayed and picked up the tours out of L.A. because that's where the music industry was at that time. And I drank beer with these guys and Irish whiskey with these guys at this pub. So I used one of those guys as my guideline for the character in Ford Fairlane. But my stuntman in that film was a French guy, and he'd actually, I think, beat Van Damme in some kickboxing matches. And he looked exactly like me, so much so that people asked him for my autograph at the
that's awesome.
table on the set. But he was afraid of the dirty water in L.A. Harbor. Down by San Pedro and Long Beach, where we shot the sinking boat sequences. And I'm an old surfer, and I've been in dirty water before. I'm a Southern California boy. And so I wound up having to do all those stunts. The sinking boat, that's me in there. He wouldn't go near the water. And so I'm doing all that stuff in there, and most of it was pretty easy stuff. I don't want to, toot my horn too much here. But we had to do pickup shots. And I came back for a pickup shot, and all I had to do was spin and kick over, a camera at about 3.5 feet, which is not that hard to do. It's just a spot turn, and you kick and extend your leg, and I just had to clear the camera so it looked cool with a nice lens on it. And I did it for the pickup shot, so they had a piece of film of me in the fight scene, but I didn't stretch before I did it. Because during the movie, I was all loose. But during the run of the movie, I was loose. I was working every day. I would stretch every day. I'd work with the stuntman a little bit. And but I came back for the pickup shot, and I just went out and did it because it was just like this, 3-foot high camera. And I tore a hernia. So when I see Ford Fairlane now, or I think of Ford Fairlane now, it's the most eccentric cast in the history of the world. Everybody from Motley Crue to Aflac Gilbert Gottfried, to Elvis Presley's wife, to Wayne Newton from Las Vegas, Andrew Dice Clay, yours truly, Married with Children. Everybody's in it. And I think of that crazy cast, and poor Billy Idol losing the role, and me kickboxing and pulling a hernia. So there's my Ford Fairlane gossip.
Michelle Merrifield asks, who's your favorite horror actor?
Well, I do love Anthony Hopkins. I love Anthony Hopkins, Hannibal Lecter, but I also love Mads Mikkelsen and his brilliant television show. But I also love Brian Cox.
Right.
The first time we ever meet Hannibal Lecter,
Manhunter,
back in the Michael Mann movie, yeah. And I thought, so I think I don't know whether it's those three actors or whether it's that character, but I really do love the Hannibal Lecter character. I also think Karloff is sublime. I saw Frank Langella do Dracula on stage, and he was terrific. And I heard that he's gone now, but I heard the wonderful actor from the 60s, Herb Hatfield. I heard he did a brilliant Dracula at a theater in I guess it was Coconut Grove in Florida, professional production. But I heard it was just really sexy and strange, and that he would almost mesmerize and hypnotize the women. And then just before he kissed them, they would almost have that dry vomit reaction, that dry heave, because Dracula smells, his breath smells.
Right.
Smells of death. So the last thing before he kisses you or bites your neck, the last thing is that smell. When he's 3 feet, it's like social distancing. When Dracula's 3 feet away, he's a sexy guy. But when he comes in for the bite, oh my God, give that guy a Tic Tac.
Diane Talbot asks if we have any ghost stories, which we did earlier. Have you ever had any moments of psychic abilities or clairvoyance for yourself?
I have a little bit of deja vu, but I haven't experienced it in years. But I have 2 concrete memories of dreaming of rooms. And then within 2 to 5 years, I was in that room. And it was a room in a recurring dream. And I can't for the life of me remember the dream, but there was a room in a dream that was a recurring dream I had. And I walked into that room years later. And it may have been a hotel. It may have been in a hotel. I can't, really remember exactly all the details. But I've had an intense deja vu twice. And you might call it a prophetic deja vu. I've been in rooms that I've dreamt of before I was in those rooms. And they were far away. I mean, they weren't like rooms near where I grew up or near where I lived. They were rooms, in other cities in the United States from where I'm from.
Sure. Heidi Levering says, where are you finding all these wonderful topics for the trilogies? Is somebody legitimately just combing through old papers?
Well, we have a great team, and we have multiple producers. One of the gentlemen was the guy that really had this concrete memory of being young and loving turning on Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack. He had these great memories, like I have, of Twilight Zone. I mean, I can remember going to school and we had to line up before we went to class, on the playground. And we would line up and we would stand there waiting for the teacher to come get us to bring us in the classroom. And we would all recap the previous night's Twilight Zone. That's how obsessed we were. It was so exciting and we all looked forward to it so much. And he had that same experience, not only with Twilight Zone, but with Unsolved Mysteries. Right. It was just the perfect moment of his maturation. And so I think he is busy just looking everywhere and searching for these things. And I know he does have a huge, great research department at the Travel Channel. And I think sometimes there's stuff that's rejected that lends itself particularly to our show. And we discovered, we're still learning. We discovered during our first 6 episodes, which are actually three segments per show, it's actually 18 stories in 6 hours. And when we actually discovered that we can pair them up sometimes thematically, critters, true terror critters, or it could be ghost stories. There's different things that kind of clump together, and we could juggle them around like a 3-card Monty and put them on one show. And I think that sometimes, because now that we've discovered that, I think there's probably a lot of scripts and a lot of research over at the Travel Channel sitting on the shelf, so that if we find 2 episodes, two newspaper articles that are just really great, strange stuff, and maybe it's serial killers, or maybe it's corrupt doctors or scientists, and then somebody goes, hey, wait a minute, so maybe somebody from one of the other shows, and he remembers a rejected story that one of the other Travel Channel shows had, or they have some research on another evil doctor, then we could get that show. We could pair that up. But I know they have a great research department working for them.
All right. That kind of dovetails nicely into the next question. Tricia says, what story on True Terror freaked you out the most?
Well, I think there's 2 of them. I love Buried Alive, which was on our premiere episode, the smallpox in New Orleans episode. But tonight we're going to have one. I believe the whole show is called Cryptic Messages. And I think we kind of shoehorned this segment in with 2 that really are cryptic messages. But this one is absolutely true. This is true terror personified, just like the smallpox epidemic episode, Buried Alive. But this one is about a guy who preserves his true love, if you catch my drift.
Right.
And all I'm going to say to you again is think Anthony Perkins in Psycho. Mother! Mother!
Stacy Crawford might get the best question award for me today. She says, could you please ask Mr. Englund if he remembers the time when I was a little kid that he was chasing me in a dream and I asked him if he could just eat pizza together and we could talk it out, and he said yes.
Well, I'll tell you, I get a lot of crayon drawings from children all over the world, and they are intrigued by the sort of hypnotic, uncomfortable red and green combination of the stripes of my sweater. They love the silhouette. A lot of people do Freddy in shadow silhouette. They love the hat, the silhouette, the extended fingers of the claw, and they love the posture of Freddy. And a lot of them, they make it out to Freddy from, and it'll say, Larry Schultz, age 11, Minneapolis, Minnesota. I really like your work, Mr. Englund. But every once in a while, they address them to Mr. Pizza Face. And I think it's Freddy versus Jason. I think Destiny's Child, Kelly Rowland. I think she calls me Pizza Face. Somebody does. And that sort of caught on with a lot of the kids. They love calling me Pizza Face.
Awesome. And the last one everybody keeps asking me about is what, if any, fond memories do you have of doing the Phantom of the Opera?
Well, Dwight Little, really talented guy, directed that film. And, of course, Dwight's always working. He just did a great film with Robert Patrick from Terminator. They have a down and dirty little heist movie out now, action heist movie that you can find. I just can't remember the title right now, but Dwight Little was one of I think he produced the second, or worked on the second Fugitive movie. Really talented guy. And his idea was to do a Phantom of the Opera in the style and as an homage to the great Hammer films of the 60s, starring Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing. And so I remember those two. For me, they were drive-in movies. And I actually remember getting close to second base with a girl on a double date at the drive-in movie. And I'm being forgetful now of the movie. I remember, I think it was Barbara Steele. And I think Barbara Steele was in a torture device, and with her heaving cleavage and her luscious red lips. And I kind of remember stopping making out with my date because I kind of preferred the girl in the Hammer film more than the real life girl. But I told that story to Dwight Little, and he knew that I understood what Hammer was. So we transferred Phantom of the Opera to London at the turn of the century, as opposed to the Paris Opera. We made it London Opera at the turn of the century. And the world of Jack the Ripper, very similar to what they'd done on this great show, Penny Dreadful, where they've combined Young Frankenstein and Dorian Gray and Dracula and the Wolfman all at the same time in Jack the Ripper's London. We wanted to tell our tale of Phantom of Opera in that London, that gin-soaked, corrupt London, violent London. And so we transposed it, and we also took advantage of, with our cinematographer, our Hungarian cinematographer, the saturated color. But we were able to use this brilliant set in Hungary. We were a morning's drive away from Budapest at an old Soviet studio in Hungary. But they had just built this great set for Threepenny Opera, Mac the Knife, with Raul Julia and the singer from The Who and some wonderful English actress. And it was like this great London set for Macheath, for Mac the Knife to prowl in London with Roger Daltrey. And it was, we didn't have to do anything to the set except light the street lights on this giant, massive stage. I mean, it was huge with horse-drawn cabs, London cabs and things. It was just brilliant. So we had that already built for us. We could spend money on the makeup and the cast. Bill Nighy was in that movie, so we could spend money on the cast and on the things we needed, or what Dwight's personal wish list, and of course my makeup, which was costly on that. But yeah, I had great memories of that. Beautiful Jill Sholin had recently done a movie called Cutting Class with an unknown actor named Brad Pitt, a great little horror movie. She also stars in The Stepfather. And she'd also done recently a Disney movie, Babes in Toyland, with a young actor unknown named Keanu Reeves. So I can always say I've shared a leading lady with Keanu and Brad Pitt.
All right. And so many questions from so many people came in. There's these rumors that keep airing that they're going to go back to the Nightmare on Elm Street well, but this time Robert Englund might be dusting off the fedora and coming back. Is there any truth to that rumor that you can share with us?
No, you guys, you've got to be so careful with the internet. It does so much good, and there's so much great stuff out there, but there's so much plagiarism and so much BS as well. And no, I've been too old for Freddy, since about 2000, about 2010. It's about the last time I could have, put on some Spanx, and popped a Viagra and done one. Because I can't get out of bed anymore after doing stunts, especially fight scenes, because you have to snap your head so many times to fake the hits. And they do it from so many different angles, and I've got all these old surfing injuries in my upper back and my top of my spine. I can't do that stuff anymore. No, I would love to be invited back to do a cameo. For instance, if they get around to remaking Nightmare 3, which is the most popular of all the films, Dream Warriors. Great film directed by Chuck Russell, who did The Mask. I would love to come back and play, the dream therapist, played by Amy Irving's mother, Priscilla Pointer, the wonderful actress. Maybe I could play it as a guy that just is very skeptical about this collective dream. You can't all be experiencing the same dream about this man in a smelly striped sweater with a fedora, And I think that there's a tradition in horror movies and in remakes where actors, that were in the previous original come back and do a cameo to kind of give it a blessing to it. And especially with horror and science fiction and fantasy, I know that's true. And so I think it would be fun for the fans to see me in a cameo in one of them. But no, they've got to find a new person to play Freddy so that the audience can fall in love with him and follow him through the various reboots and prequels and sequels.
Very cool. Well, Mr. Englund, thank you again for joining us. Hopefully it's not another 9 years before we can visit with you.
Okay.
The show is True Terror with Robert Englund on the Travel Channel's Wednesday. They have 6 episodes in this first premiere series. Make sure that you watch them and watch them soon. Go set your DVRs for it. And thank you so much for joining us, and stay safe out there, would you?
You too. Thank you. Wash your hands.
Will do. All right.
I'm washing my claw right now.
Excellent. All right, folks, that's it for this episode. We'll be back again next week with more of the best in paranormal talk radio. I'm Dave. That's Tim. This is Darkness Radio.